Could Mark Few be the next head coach for Team USA? It's bold, but it's not as bold as you might think.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Ultimate College Football Head Coach. It is a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, folks, it is September. We are not quite ready to start our player preview series, although that is coming up towards the end of the month. Right now, what I want to do is give you some bold predictions. I've done bold prediction shows the last couple of years. A couple of years ago, predicting Julian Strawther to drop 40 points in a game, which he did at Portland that very same year. I brag about that because I have not gotten any of the other bold predictions correct, although I do try to make predictions that are exceptionally bold. This year, I'm planning 2 bold predictions episodes. I will have one episode later in probably sometime this month that is dedicated to player-specific predictions. Don't know what those predictions are going to be yet. We'll do some digging into that later on, but they will be specifically about players on Gonzaga's current roster. I say that because today's episode features 3 bold predictions, one in each segment, but none of them are about current players on the roster. We have a Mark Few prediction, we have a Zags in the NBA prediction, and we have one more kind of unique prediction to close out the show. That's the format for today. We're going to start with what we teased in that very cold open there at the beginning. Mark Few, bold prediction number 1. He is the next head coach for Team USA in the 2028 Olympic Games in Los Angeles. And this seems bold, but it's not necessarily that bold. Case in point, the, of course, head coach for Team USA in 2024, when Mark Few was an assistant coach in Paris, France this last month, really, was Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr, longtime coach. He's coached Team USA for a while prior to that, but he has made it very clear he is not going to be the coach in 2028. He is stepping down from that position. He plans to pass the baton onward to somebody else to take over going forward. I know it sounds like he's kind of ratcheting down just in his career in general and doesn't want to be in that position again 4 years from now when the Olympics come back to the States in Los Angeles. So Steve Kerr's out. The 3 assistant coaches alongside Steve Kerr for Team USA this last month were, of course, Mark Few, Erik Spoelstra, the head coach of the Miami Heat, and then Tyronn Lue, longtime NBA head coach as well. Many people believe that the next head coach is going to be Erik Spoelstra, and that is probably going to be your betting favorite. If you're wanting to be gambling on that, feel free. I'm sure there are lines somewhere out there, but I think the general consensus is that Spoelstra is the kind of likely, and some will even say obvious candidate to replace Steve Kerr. He's been in the system. He's familiar with the players, the kind of what is asked of you as a head coach in the international stage. He's familiar with the FIBA rules, the differences between the NBA. He's obviously coached many of these guys in the past, whether with the Miami Heat and Bam Adebayo, of course, LeBron James in previous era. So he's familiar with the players. He's familiar with the system. He's familiar with the rules. He's familiar with Olympic basketball. All of that makes sense for why it would be Spoelstra in that situation. But most of that is true of Mark Few. Obviously, Mark Few doesn't have as much experience coaching players who are going to be in the Olympics. Now, granted, by the time 2028 rolls around, and this is not another prediction of mine necessarily, but we know that Jalen Suggs played with Team USA on the select team, which oftentimes players who represent Team USA on the select squad, which scrimmages with the actual Olympic team prior to them heading out to the Olympics, a lot of players who participate in that event end up making the Olympics in future years. Tyrese Halliburton and Anthony Edwards were both on the select team in 2021. They are both were both Olympians this past year as well. So Jalen Suggs could be an Olympian in 2028. Chet Holmgren very much could be an Olympian in 2028. I don't want to say it'd be surprising if he isn't, but it'd be kind of surprising if he isn't. You look at the front court, we'll see if Joel Embiid wants to do it again. That's a question mark. Anthony Davis, age-wise, I think there's a bit of a question there. I suspect Bam Adebayo will be back. So there may not be a ton of room in the front court. Certainly if Embiid, Bam, and Davis are all back, that's going to make it a lot harder for somebody like Chet to potentially break through and be on that roster. But if any of those guys are gone, you're looking to replicate there. I think Chet's somebody who makes a ton of sense. There's obviously some other young guys in the league that make some sense as well. Paolo Banchero, I think, gets himself into that conversation. Potentially Brandon Miller from Alabama. Like there's a lot of guys who could be in that mix. And I don't think Mark Few is a candidate to get the job purely because, well, maybe Jalen Suggs and Chet Holmgren will be Olympians. That's not what I'm trying to say. It could be a factor, though. It could be a situation where Mark Few is the head coach and a pair of the players on the 12-man roster are Zags, which, by the way, how cool would that be in 2028 if that situation becomes a reality? But here's the thing. A college coach taking over Team USA has happened before, and it's happened very recently. Coach K, legendary Mike Krzyzewski, longtime Duke head coach, one of the most prolific coaches in basketball history, certainly in college basketball history. He's a 3-time Olympic champion. He took over for Team USA before the 2008 Olympics, ultimately was the head coach for 2008, the Redeem team, that very infamous team that won that gold medal in 2008. Krzyzewski was the head coach for that team. He led them to gold in 2012. He led them to gold again in 2016. 3 gold medals for Mike Krzyzewski while he was in the midst of his coaching career with the Duke Blue Devils. Went out and won himself 3 gold medals. He also won FIBA gold medal in 2010 and 2014. He won a bronze in 1990 and 2006. This man has coached a bunch of Olympic level basketball while being a college basketball coach. Proof that it can happen, proof that Olympic basketball is willing to hire a college basketball coach to be the person who leads this team. Mark Few would do this job. I don't think that's a question. I don't think there's a mystery of like, oh, well, maybe the things could line up in a sense where they would offer him the job if Spo doesn't want it. Maybe they offer it to Mark Few, but I think he would turn it down. No, I don't think so. I think Mark Few would take it in a heartbeat if given the opportunity to be the head coach for Team USA. Yeah, it comes with scrutiny. It comes a different stage, a different level than he's ever been on, but I think he would do it in a heartbeat. He is so proud of this country. He is so proud of the opportunity to be on the world stage, that the opportunity to be the head coach, to be the man who leads a team to a gold medal, I could not imagine Mark Few saying no to that opportunity. And again, all the arguments that are there right now, he's familiar with the system. He's familiar with the team. Obviously, not all those players are going to be back. We'll see about the three-headed monster of Durant and LeBron and Steph, if those guys come back or not. But Mark Few is now familiar with, he's worked with some of the younger guys, with Bam Adebayo, with Tyrese Halliburton, with Jason Tatum, with guys like that who are expected to be bigger contributors in 2028. He's worked with them. They're familiar with who he is. Some guys who come into the system could end up being players he's familiar with as well, and guys like Suggs and Holmgren potentially. So there's a lot to like about this. And I know I've seen Danny Hurley's name mentioned, and I've seen some other college coaches mentioned, but if they're going to go the route of hiring a college coach to take over, if they don't want to go with Spo, or he doesn't want to do it, or they don't want to go with Tyronn Lue, or they're not feeling like an NBA coach is the right move, and they're going to look to college, I'd be absolutely floored if they went for a college coach that isn't Mark Few. Again, if Few were to, for some reason, turn it down, sure, maybe they go Danny Hurley, maybe they go Scott Drew, maybe they look in a different direction. But why wouldn't they go with Mark Few, who already has that familiarity? Like, he was the guy who got offered the job in the first place. Like, they're not going to be like, oh, well, now we got to bring Danny in. Yeah, Danny's great. He's a phenomenal coach. But I would be stunned if they passed up Mark Few to bring a college coach who hasn't coached at the FIBA level, who hasn't coached at the Olympic level, and brought somebody in over Mark Few. That would be stunning to me and very surprising. So I think if it's not Eric Spoelstra, if it's not Tyronn Lue, there's a very real chance that Mark Few is leading Team USA in 2028. And he might be leading a couple Zags. And those Zags who might be in that Olympic picture, well, those guys might be all-stars as soon as 2025. That's what I want to talk about here in the second segment. Gonzaga's had 2 alumni in history make the NBA All-Star game. Could that number double in 2025? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Hey, Locked On fans, I want to take a moment to give you a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you are going to love. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. In this amazing simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. From recruiting players and hiring a coaching staff to overseeing training camps and handling scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. Will you be able to handle the pressure? Ultimate College Football Head Coach is completely free. It has no ads and is 100% playable offline, so you can play on the go, whenever and wherever you want. And of course, we have a special offer for Locked On Zags fans. Use promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. To download the game, just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up on the Google or Apple app stores. Ultimate College Football Head Coach. Begin your coaching legacy today. All right, folks, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still going through and talking bold predictions here for the upcoming season, sort of. They're bold predictions. They're not about players on the team. They're bold predictions more generally in the Gonzaga space. We talked about Mark Few. Could he be the head coach for Team USA men's basketball in the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles? We talked about whether that's a reality, possibility, what that might look like. Bold prediction number 2 here is that in 2025, 3 Gonzaga basketball alumni will make the NBA All-Star game. 3 Zags making the All-Star game. Again, 2 players have ever been All-Stars out of Gonzaga in the history of the program. One of them was John Stockton, who made something like 40 All-Star games in his career. Now, I think it's like 19, 18, somewhere in there. Tons of All-Star games for John Stockton, of course, one of the most prolific point guards, if not the most prolific point guard in basketball history. Long time player for the Utah Jazz. The other Zag to make the All-Star game is, of course, Domantas Sabonis. Sabonis has made 3 All-Star games in his illustrious career, first with the Oklahoma City Thunder, then with the Indiana Pacers, which is where he made his first All-Star games, and then with the Sacramento Kings, where he has become a triple-double machine. Let's start with Sabonis, because if we're talking about 3 Zags making the All-Star game next year, he is far, far and away the most likely player to actually do it. He was not an All-Star last year, although he should have been. He was left off the team and is very competitive to make that All-Star game roster, particularly in the Western Conference, particularly in the Western Conference front court, which is going to be a large part of the conversation we're having right here. Sabonis finished 8th in MVP voting last year, despite not making the All-Star game. He was an All-NBA caliber, or All-NBA contributor as well. Finished the season with Sacramento, averaging 19.5 points, 13.7 rebounds. That led the league, as well as 8.2 assists. So basically 20, 14, and 8. Is what Domantas Sabonis averaged last year as a member of the Sacramento Kings. Shot about 61% on 2-pointers, about 38% from 3. Now, Sacramento goes out and adds DeMar DeRozan to the backcourt. You have DeRozan and De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis kind of keying that offense from the top of the key. This team is going to be good next year. Sabonis is going to be competing. He's going to be in the competition for the Sacramento team's going to be in the competition for a top 5, top 6 seed. If they make the playoffs, if they get a favorable seed, if Sabonis puts up numbers similar to this, he should absolutely be in that All-Star conversation. He's entering his age 28 season, which is kind of right when you hit your peak in NBA. So certainly plenty of reasons and opportunities to believe that he could be an All-Star next season. But like we said, the competition, the Western Conference front court, you got Nikola Jokic, you got Anthony Davis, you got Victor Wembanyama, you got Kevin Durant from Phoenix. Like, that's just a few of the guys who are in that conversation. If all those guys make it, there are not a whole lot of leftover spots for other front court bigs in the Western Conference. And Sabonis is not only going to be competing with those guys, he's going to be competing with another Zag. And that's where I want to take the conversation now. Chet Holmgren, entering his 2nd NBA season, 3rd year out of college. He obviously missed his entire first season with the Lisfranc injury on his left foot. Came back from that injury to have his rookie season last year and was frankly just about all-star caliber already. As a true rookie in the 2023-24 NBA season, Chet Holmgren, starting center for the number 1 seeded Oklahoma City Thunder in the Western Conference, averaged 16.5 points, just about 8 boards, 2.5 assists, and 2.3 blocks per game. Similar efficiency numbers to Domantas. He shot 62% on 2s and 37% from 3. Chet is an elite rim protector. He is an elite floor spacing big. We know all the great things about Chet Holmgren. We saw it firsthand in his lone spectacular season with the Gonzaga Bulldogs. We saw it last year in his rookie season with Oklahoma City. And now the question is, what leaps can he take? He feels like he can get a lot better. How does that look? Is that more efficiency offensively? Is that more aggressiveness offensively? Chet he's a role player. He likes to take shots when he's wide open. Does he become more aggressive? Does he have the ball in his hands more? I don't think Oklahoma City wants to take the ball out of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's hands, so I'm not necessarily sure that's going to be the case. But if we see Chet improve defensively, become an even better rim protector, a better perimeter defensive player, be more efficient offensively, all of that is possible. But again, the question is whether there is room in that front court for him to be in that conversation. He's competing with the same guys as Domas. He's competing against Domas as well as Jokic, as well as Anthony Davis, Victor Wembanyama, like we said, Kevin Durant, all those guys. There are many others that we're not mentioning that are going to be in that conversation for the All-Star game out of the Western Conference. Chet and Sabonis both making it, I don't want to say it's impossible because it's not. They're both good enough. They're both absolutely good enough to play well enough this year to be in the All-Star conversation. But will they both make it? Sabonis has played well enough to be an All-Star many more than 3 years, and he has only made it 3 times. Is Chet going to fall victim to the same thing where he continually, every other year, he makes the All-Star game when in reality his numbers don't change year over year? It's just finicky in terms of whether he actually sneaks in or not. Is that a thing that's going to happen for Chet? Hard to say. Hard to say. But right now, the odds of both these players playing well enough to be All-Stars, pretty high. The odds of them both making it, well, that's why it's a bold prediction. That's why it's a bold prediction, because we also got to get a third guy in there as well. For this to come true, you got to get all three. You got to get 3 Zags in that All-Star game. Sabonis is the most likely. Chet's probably the next most likely. What about Jalen Suggs? Can Jalen Suggs have another breakout season, breakout 2.0 for Suggs, who was on the NBA All-Defensive second team last year? He finished 8th in most improved player voting, finished his season with Orlando averaging 12.5 points, 3 boards, 2.7 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. Shot just under 40% from 3. The thing with Suggs, the offense needs to continue to tick up. He's not asked to fill a huge offensive role. For Orlando, they have Paolo Banchero, they have Franz Wagner. Those guys are their primary scoring options. Suggs is the 3rd/4th option offensively. He is a menace defensively, one of, if not the best pick and roll guard defender in all of basketball, in all of the NBA right now. So the question for him is, you rarely make an All-Star game purely based on your defense. You got to contribute enough offensively to get into that conversation. There's the Drew Holidays, the Marcus Smarts, the other kind of highly defensive-focused guards, and some of them have been All-Stars, and it's not impossible to do that for Jalen Suggs. But again, the Eastern Conference, it's hard. There's not very many roster spots for either Eastern or Western. It's just competitive to get into that game. If you're in the Eastern Conference guard, you're looking at Tyrese Halliburton, you're looking at Jalen Brunson, you're looking at Jaylen Brown, Tyrese Maxey, Tyler Herro. There's a lot of really good guards in the Eastern Conference, and Jalen Suggs is going to have to compete and be better than that group of players if he wants to be in that All-Star conversation. And it's true of Andrew Nembhard as well. We said 3 Zags are making the All-Star game. If I'm predicting, I'm saying Sabonis, Chet, and Jalen. If you want to hear a specific prediction, but don't discount Andrew Nembhard. He looked phenomenal in the Eastern Conference playoffs last year when Tyrese Halliburton didn't play. He led Indiana to some tremendous performances against the eventual champion Boston Celtics. I don't think that Nembhard's going to have the role full season to put up the numbers necessary to be an All-Star, simply because unless something happens to Tyrese Halliburton, he's going to be the one with the ball in his hands primarily for Indiana, whereas Nembhard's a bit more of a secondary creator. We'll also see what the health of Ben Mathurin might do for Nembhard's playing time, but he's certainly somebody who could push his way into this conversation as well. A little less confident about the other Zags. Corey Kispert putting up good numbers on a bad team. He'd have to put up really big numbers to do it for Washington. Brandon Clark, Rui Hachimura, Zach Collins. There's others who are good players who are going to play big minutes, but who probably aren't going to be able to play their way into the All-Star conversation. And that's fine. It's hard to make the All-Star game, as we've already discussed here, but would be a tremendous feather in the cap for Gonzaga if this year were to result not only in the success we believe they're capable of having at the collegiate level, but if 3 Gonzaga alumni were to make the All-Star game. And I think it's Like I said, it's bold. That's why we're talking about it here on a Bold Predictions show, but it is definitely possible with the amount of talent this program has put into the association in the last half decade or so. Well, Gonzaga not only puts players in the NBA, they put coaches all across the country. Mark Few's coaching tree is spreading like wildfire right now. The coaching tree currently has head coaches at 5 different programs. How many of them might make the NCAA tournament this year? We got answers to that and more coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you all about 5-Hour Energy. Just about every day, folks, right after lunch, I feel tired. It's that afternoon lull. We all feel it. If you're like me, good news. You're far from alone. In fact, research shows that more than 70% of us hit a wall right after lunch. So let a 5-Hour Energy shot help you leap over that wall instead of crashing into it. If you're like me, you've also been working on cutting sugar. I'm working on that as I'm getting a little bit older. So I love that 5-Hour Energy has 0 sugar. Plus, it's got a convenient portable size and is the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore. Watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. You can try them all. And on the site, you even have the option to build your own 12 or 24 pack. You choose the flavors and it is delivered directly to your door. So just go to 5hourenergy.com and get some 5-Hour Energy products today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is no good on subscription orders. So go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still doing our bold predictions here, non-player edition for this show here. We're going to do a bold prediction show later in the month where we are going to talk about the specific Gonzaga roster and some predictions for how these things might shake out this season. But for today, we're doing a bit more kind of all-encompassing bold predictions for Gonzaga in general. We talked about Mark Few potentially taking over as the head coach for Team USA in 2028. We talked about a trio of Gonzaga alumni who are in the NBA who could all be NBA All-Stars this year. We actually talked about more than 3, but predicted that 3 of them will end up being in that All-Star game. We're closing out the show talking about former Gonzaga assistant coaches, because right now there are 5 former coaches. I say former assistants. One of them is a former head coach. 5 former Gonzaga coaches who are currently head coaches at the Division I college basketball level. I'm almost positive I didn't miss anybody. Obviously, if I did, please let me know. But I'm counting 5 coaches right now in my bold prediction, and this is far and away the boldest of the bold predictions that I'm making here for a couple of reasons in particular. But my bold prediction is that every one of these 5 head coaches, and of course Gonzaga, so all 6 of those programs are dancing. All 6 of these teams make the 2025 NCAA tournament. Gonzaga's coaching tree has a prolific season in college hoops in 24-25. We'll go through them one by one. Of course, we don't need to go into the Mark Few of it all. We'll just skip that one. Next up, Tommy Lloyd, probably the most obvious candidate here. Tommy Lloyd, of course, entering his, I believe, 4th season now as the head coach of the Arizona Wildcats. Has made the tournament every year that he has been the head coach, a near lock to do it again. They move into the Big 12. Yeah, it's going to be more difficult, but Tommy's team loaded up. They get Caleb Love back. They also get Jaden Bradley back in the guard room. That's going to be huge for them to have those 2 guys back. KJ Lewis is expected to be a sophomore breakout candidate as well. They added some fun transfers. Trey Townsend from Oakland, Anthony Del Orso from Campbell, Toby Awaka from Tennessee. Motej Krivas is going to step into a bigger role in the front court, replacing Umar Ballo. I like this team. I'm not as high on them as a lot of national media. I think they're going to be at the bottom of my top 10, maybe in that 10 to 15 range, just because a lot of new faces, a lot of continuity that I think Tommy's going to have to navigate. But would be an absolute stunner if this team wasn't in the NCAA tournament. Tommy's going to get them there. Very, very likely. I think Leon Rice and Boise State feel pretty likely to get into that dance as well. They've made it each of the last 3 seasons, so it's not like it's unprecedented for Leon Rice and the Broncos to be dancing in March. The issue for Rice and Boise State is that they can't win a game. They keep making the NCAA tournament and they keep losing. They lose in the first 4, or if they actually get a seed and a bid, they lose there as well. They're just struggling to actually advance in the NCAA tournament. But this year's team, yeah, they lose some talent. Max Rice is gone. Leon's son, he's out of eligibility. That's a tough loss for them. Chibuzo Agbo's gone. He transfers to USC. He was a big part of their team last year, but they keep Tyson Degenhart. They keep Omar Stanley. They add Alvaro Cardenas, a transfer from San Jose State, who averaged 13 points, 5.5 assists, shot about 38.5% from three last year. So they got some talent coming in. They retained some talent. I think the Mountain West is down this year. New Mexico lost a bunch of talent. San Diego State doesn't look like they're going to be as good. Utah State lost their coach and their best player to Washington. So I think Boise State's got a chance to be one of the more competitive teams in the conference. I think Nevada will be in that conversation as well. And UNLV could potentially kind of sneak into that conversation in ways that they haven't lately. But I think Boise State has a real chance to be the best team in the Mountain West, to win the Mountain West this upcoming season, and to secure themselves a bid in the NCAA tournament. Hopefully it results in some actual wins in that big dance. But I do think Leon and Tommy are very likely going to be dancing alongside Mark Few. That leaves three more coaches. Next up is Dan Monson. Let's talk about Dan, who is moving on from Long Beach State, where he coached for 17 years. He was let go before the end of the season and then led Long Beach State to a Big West Conference title and a 15 seed in the NCAA tournament. His reward was having to face his old coworker, Tommy Lloyd, and the Arizona Wildcats. It was a wild couple of weeks of action for Dan Monson, but he is now back home, Cheney, Washington, coaching the Eastern Washington Eagles, about 30 miles away from Spokane. This is going to be a tough. Probably the second most difficult team to get into the NCAA tournament of the six that we're talking about here on this list. Mostly because this entire team transferred to Washington State. David Riley, the former head coach at Eastern Washington, took the vacant head coaching position at Washington State and took half-ish of his team with him. There's a lot of new faces for this Eastern Washington squad. They do add Tyler Powell from Nevada, a guy who shot 37.5% from three with the Wolfpack last year. The good news for Eastern is that the Big Sky is pretty wide open. Definitely an avenue for them winning this conference. Again, it doesn't matter. The Big Sky is a true one-bid league. All you got to do is win that championship game. Whether you were the 10th seeded team or the first seeded team, it doesn't matter. Unless you go completely undefeated until the Big Sky championship game and lose, in which case you maybe get a bid in the NCAA tournament. It would depend on your non-conference schedule, though. This is a true one-bid league, so all Dan Munson's got to do is do what he did last year at Long Beach State, which is rally the troops, get your guys together to win a handful of consecutive games in the conference tournament, and find yourself dancing. Munson's done it before. He can do it again. Two more coaches to talk about here. We got Roger Powell at Valparaiso and John Jakus at Florida Atlantic. Powell went 7-25 last year in the Missouri Valley Conference at Valparaiso. That is easily the toughest ask on this list. I'm going to be, frankly, a little annoyed if 4 out of these 5 teams make the NCAA tournament and Powell and Valparaiso is the only team that does not, because that's what takes this from bold to like insanely spicy bold. Now, here's the thing. The Missouri Valley Conference, also traditionally a one-bid league. They should have been a two-bid league. Last year, Drake earned the automatic bid, and Indiana State had a very strong resume to be an at-large bid. They did not get it. They then went to the championship of the NIT where they lost to Seton Hall. But here's the thing. Drake's coach, gone. He actually is now the head coach at West Virginia, who Gonzaga will face in the first game in the battle for Atlantis. Indiana State's coach, Josh Schertz, is gone as well, over to St. Louis, where he brought his best player, Robbie Avila, along with him. Bradley, the team that finished third in the Missouri Valley Conference, their coach is gone too. So there's a lot of new faces, a lot of lack of familiarity in the Missouri Valley Conference. Is that enough for Powell to go from 3-17 and 12th place all the way to the top? That's a tough ask. Let's put it that way. They got some transfers coming in. Isaiah Shaw comes over from Grand Canyon. Carson Schweiger comes from Wright State, some guys who were productive last year at the mid-major level. It would be a complete turnaround. It would be one of the most dramatic year-over-year results in all of college basketball. But hey, we're doing a show in September where we're making bold predictions. Why the heck not? Closing it out with John Jakus, who's a former director of basketball operations for Gonzaga. Never actually had an assistant coach title for the Zags, but he used to work for the program, so we're going to count him here. He's taken over at Florida Atlantic, the Owls, replacing Dusty May, the most successful coach in FAU basketball history. Took that team to a Final Four and back to the NCAA tournament before taking the head coaching job at Michigan. Jakus is a part of the Scott Drew coaching tree as well. He went over to Baylor along with Rem Bakamis and a few others, and had worked at Baylor for a while before getting this job here at FAU. So we've seen a lot of Baylor coaches work out really well. Jerome Tang at Kansas State, Grant McCasland at Texas Tech are two members of the Scott Drew coaching tree. We'll see if Jakus can have similar success. They landed Baba Miller in the transfer portal out of Florida State, a guy that there's a lot of intrigue and upside about him as a future NBA star. They added a trio of guys who scored in double figures at the mid-major level last year in Kai Tandy, Leland Walker, and AJ Staten McCray. They added a couple high major guys, Caleb Glenn from Louisville, Nico Moretti from Illinois. A lot of talent, a lot of new faces, a lot of new talent for John Jakus. He also hired Eric McClellan, former Zag guard, who is a graduate assistant for the Owls. Very excited to see how this season goes. Would not be surprised to see Jakus keep this team in the NCAA tournament picture, either as an at-large, which is tougher, or to win the AAC outright. Memphis, South Florida are certainly going to be contenders there, but don't be surprised to see Jakus keep this FAU team afloat. So I think Tommy Lloyd and Arizona are in. I think Leon Rice is in. I think John Jakus and Florida Atlantic can make it. We'll see if Dan Monson and Eastern and Roger Powell at Valpo can bring it up and get those teams in as well. But it would be an incredible story if Mark Few and 5 of his former coaches or former colleagues are all in the NCAA tournament in 2025. It's going to do it for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back later this week with one more show, and then we'll move on into next week. Again, we're starting those player preview episodes, season previews coming later in the month. We'll get some more bold predictions for you, some recruiting updates as we learn more about what's going on there, some guests lined up as well, all sorts of fun stuff here in September on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thanks again for listening, folks, and until next time, as always, go Zags.